Some tractors were built to work the land. Others look like they were created by engineers who completely ignored every limit of common sense. Machines with massive steel wheels, engines that sounded more like locomotives, tractors that were oddly luxurious for their time, and designs so bizarre that people still struggle to believe they were real. Today, you're about to see some of the most ridiculous, overbuilt, and unusual vintage tractors ever created. And the craziest part is that many of these machines actually worked hard in real farms and fields around the world. Stick around until the end, because the last tractor on this list looks less like farm equipment and more like an industrial experiment that somehow escaped into the countryside. Fordson Model F. Back when farming was still dominated by horses and manual labor, Ford decided to do something incredibly bold. In 1917, the Fordson Model F arrived in the United States as a tractor designed to bring mechanization to small farmers. Even though it was revolutionary for its time, the machine already looked strange, even by early 20th century standards. The design was extremely compact and simple. It used a 4-cylinder engine with around 4.1 liters, producing roughly 20 horsepower at the drawbar. The manual transmission had 3 forward gears and 1 reverse, all designed to be cheap, durable, and easy to repair out in the field. There was no comfort, no sound insulation, and absolutely no concern for ergonomics. It was basically a block of iron built for one thing only: work. Its visual presence still stands out today. The massive rear steel wheels with huge traction spikes looked like something pulled straight out of an industrial factory. As the tractor rolled across dry soil, the sound of steel slamming into the ground mixed with the deep rumble of the engine created a scene that felt more like a moving machine shop than a farm vehicle. On some versions, the operator practically sat on top of the transmission, feeling every vibration directly through the seat. In practice, the Fordson completely changed small corn, wheat, and cotton farms across the United States and parts of Europe. It could replace multiple draft animals by itself and allowed farmers to work much larger areas in less time. But the tractor also became infamous for one dangerous flaw. Under certain conditions, especially when pulling heavy implements uphill, some units could suddenly rear backward. Even with its flaws, the Fordson became one of the most important machines in agricultural mechanization history. And if this one already looks strange today, the tractors coming next get even crazier. Land's Bulldog HR2. While many early tractors tried to become smoother and more practical, Lanz decided to go in the exact opposite direction. In 1920s Germany, the Lanz Bulldog HR2 was born, a tractor so loud, rough, and bizarre that it still feels like a mechanical experiment with absolutely no concern for comfort. At the center of the machine was a gigantic single-cylinder horizontal engine using a hot bulb ignition system, and that made the whole thing even more absurd. Before starting the tractor, the operator literally had to heat part of the engine with a blowtorch. Only after several minutes of direct flame would the engine finally come to life. The huge displacement produced somewhere between 30 and 40 horsepower in early versions, but the real highlight was the massive low-end torque. The sound of this tractor was impossible to ignore. Every combustion stroke echoed across the field like a giant steel hammer slamming into metal. The huge flywheel slowly rotated while thick smoke poured from the exhaust. Watching a Lanz Bulldog working in a wheat or potato field felt more like watching a farm locomotive crawl across the land. In real-world farming, it became extremely popular across parts of Europe because it could run on very low-quality fuel, something incredibly important during difficult economic periods. In rural parts of Germany, farmers often used heavy oils, raw diesel, and improvised fuel mixtures just to keep the machine running during long workdays. Even decades later, the Lanz Bulldog remains one of the most iconic vintage agricultural machines ever built. At tractor shows, people still gather just to hear the slow, thunderous rhythm of that enormous engine running in person. And if you think this tractor was strange, The next one looks even more ridiculous. Par 30-60. In the early 1900s, some tractors still looked like industrial machines, hastily adapted for farm work. And the Par 30-60 was exactly that. Built in the United States, it arrived during a period when agriculture was slowly moving away from steam-powered equipment. Honestly, looking at it today, the machine feels more like an improvised agricultural locomotive than a conventional farm tractor. Its massive two-cylinder engine ran on heavy fuel and delivered around 60 horsepower on the belt and about 30 horsepower at the drawbar, huge numbers for that era. The entire mechanical setup was enormous, slow, and incredibly heavy. The manual transmission had only a few gears because the focus was constant pulling power instead of speed. This was the kind of machine designed to drag giant implements across fields for hours without stopping. Visually, the Par was intimidating. The rear steel wheels were enormous, covered in giant steel lugs meant to claw into the soil for traction. The operator sat completely exposed on a high platform surrounded by gears, hot smoke, and non-stop vibration. When one of these crossed a field, the metallic noise echoed for miles. It became especially common on large wheat farms across the American plains, where massive operations demanded machines capable of replacing entire teams of workers. In some regions, farmers traveled long distances just to see a Par operating because the tractor looked far too huge to be real for its time. Besides its brute strength, the Par also made history for another reason. The company itself helped popularize the word tractor, a term that eventually became standard worldwide. And if this machine already looked oversized for farming, the next one practically brought an entire steam locomotive into the field. Fowler steam traction engine. Long before modern tractors took over agriculture, some farms literally used gigantic steam-powered machines to work the land. Few represent that era better than the Fowler steam traction engine, built in the United Kingdom during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. This thing looked far more prepared to pull railroad cars than operate inside a field. Instead of using a conventional combustion engine, it relied on a massive boiler fueled by coal or wood to generate steam pressure. That pressure powered enormous cylinders responsible for moving the gigantic steel wheels. The whole process required constant fire, water, and experienced operators to keep everything functioning safely. It was basically a moving power plant crawling through farmland. The visual impact was unbelievable. Thick smoke pouring from the chimney, steam hissing under pressure, and the shine of all that exposed metal transformed any farming operation into a mechanical spectacle. In muddy terrain, the steel wheels partially sank into the ground, while the machine slowly dragged huge implements across the field. These giants were heavily used on large farms in England for deep plowing and stationary threshing operations. On some farms, a single Fowler machine replaced dozens of workers and multiple draft animals at the same time. But keeping everything running was hard work. Water had to be constantly replenished, and any mistake involving boiler pressure could become extremely dangerous. Today, seeing a Fowler steam machine operating at historical events still amazes people who already know vintage farm equipment. The smell of burning coal, the sound of escaping steam, and the sheer size of the machine make it feel like agriculture traveled back more than 100 years. And if you're enjoying this journey through the most ridiculous and fascinating farm machines ever built, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. Because from this point on, these tractors start becoming even more unbelievable. Caterpillar 2-ton crawler. At a time when most farmers still relied on massive steel wheels to handle rough terrain, Caterpillar showed up in the United States with something that looked more like military equipment than farm machinery. Released in the late 1920s, the 2-ton crawler shocked people by replacing traditional rear wheels with full steel tracks, something extremely unusual for agriculture back then. Under its compact body sat a 4-cylinder gasoline engine producing around 25 horsepower. That number may not sound impressive today, but the real strength came from its incredible traction. The steel tracks spread the tractor's weight across the ground, allowing it to work through mud, soft soil, and areas where conventional wheeled tractors would immediately get stuck. Visually, it looked like a tiny agricultural tank crossing the fields. The metal tracks created a heavy clanking sound while crushing dirt, rocks, and mud without hesitation. Its low and rugged stance gave the machine a strange sense of stability, almost like it was glued to the ground. This model became especially popular in regions with difficult soil conditions, particularly wet areas across the United States, where wheeled tractors struggled badly. On some farms, it spent entire days pulling heavy plows through muddy fields that would stop ordinary machines in their tracks. Even though it looks small compared to many tractors of its time, the 2-ton crawler helped establish traction systems in agriculture and paved the way for many modern high-horsepower crawler tractors. And if a farm tractor looking like a tank already seemed strange, the next machine went in the complete opposite direction. Minneapolis Moline UDLX Comfort Tractor. During the 1930s, while most tractors were still loud, uncomfortable, and brutally simple, Minneapolis Moline decided to create something almost unbelievable for the era. That machine became the UDLX Comfort Tractor, an American tractor that blended farm equipment with luxury automobile design in a way nobody expected. The tractor used a 4-cylinder engine with roughly 4.6 liters, producing around 46 horsepower. Its manual transmission allowed much higher speeds than most tractors of the period, reaching close to 40 miles per hour under certain conditions. That turned the UDLX into a machine capable of working in the field while also traveling quickly between farms. But what truly made people stop and stare was the enclosed cab. At a time when nearly every tractor left operators exposed to wind, rain, dust, and cold weather, the UDLX offered doors, windows, a windshield, and even a more refined interior. For many farmers, it looked ridiculously luxurious for something meant to plow fields. Ironically, that luxury became part of the problem. The tractor was far too expensive for many farmers during the Great Depression, and plenty of people viewed it as unnecessary sophistication for agricultural work. Very few units were ever produced, turning the UDLX into one of the rarest and most collectible vintage tractors in existence today. Whenever one appears at antique farm shows now, it usually becomes the center of attention. After all, it's not every day you see a tractor that looked like it wanted to compete with luxury cars from the same era. And from here on out, this list enters an even stranger level of agricultural engineering. Allis-Chalmers Model B. Not every old tractor had to be gigantic to look bizarre. The Allis-Chalmers Model B, introduced in the United States in 1937, became famous for looking almost too small for serious farm work. And honestly, that's part of what still makes it so fascinating today. While other manufacturers focused on massive, intimidating machines, Allis-Chalmers built a lightweight tractor that looked completely different from the competition. The machine used a 4-cylinder engine with around 2 liters of displacement, producing close to 17 horsepower. That may sound tiny today, but at the time it was enough to replace horses on many small family farms. The manual transmission had 4 forward gears and was designed to stay simple, affordable, and easy to maintain. Its design immediately stood out. The narrow front end, oversized rear wheels, and elevated driving position made the tractor look slightly unbalanced at all times. Watching one operate on rough terrain could honestly make people nervous because the machine looked too narrow to stay stable in certain situations. Despite its compact size, the Model B became extremely useful on cotton farms, vegetable fields, and small corn operations across the United States. Its narrow dimensions allowed it to work between crop rows without damaging plants, while the lighter weight reduced soil compaction compared to heavier tractors. Many farmers loved the machine for its fuel economy and mechanical simplicity, while others thought it looked almost fragile compared to larger tractors of the era. Even so, thousands were produced, and many still survive today at vintage farm events and historical tractor shows. The Allis-Chalmers Model B eventually became a symbol of the moment. Tractors started evolving away from giant industrial monsters and toward practical machines built for smaller farms. And if this one looked strange because of its compact size, the next tractor takes bizarre engineering to a completely different level. Renault 3042. In the post-war years, many manufacturers tried modernizing European agriculture, but some projects ended up looking strange even for their own time. The Renault 3042, built in France during the 1950s, was one of those tractors that instantly grabbed attention because of its compact shape, unusual front end, and the feeling that it was somehow part farm machine and part road vehicle. It used a 4-cylinder diesel engine, producing around 30 horsepower, enough power for small and medium-sized European farms. The manual transmission featured several short gear ratios focused on delivering strong, low-speed torque, something extremely important for vineyards, smaller crop fields, and the narrow rural terrain common throughout France. Its styling looked completely different from the aggressive American tractors of the same era. The rounded bodywork, wide fenders, and elevated operator position gave the Renault 3042 an oddly refined appearance for a piece of agricultural equipment. But despite the cleaner look, field work was still rough. The engine vibrated heavily, thick smoke poured out under load, and the machine sounded far more aggressive in operation than it looked standing still. Across many regions of France, the tractor became popular in vineyards and smaller family farms where giant tractors simply made no practical sense. Its compact dimensions allowed it to maneuver through tight spaces and delicate crop rows without causing unnecessary damage. Many examples survived thanks to their relatively simple mechanics and straightforward maintenance. Today, seeing a restored Renault 3042 running at a vintage agricultural show brings a strong sense of nostalgia to many collectors. It represents a period when tractors started becoming more practical while still holding on to the weird charm of early farm machinery. And if this one still seems relatively normal compared to the others, the next tractor looks like something assembled during a mechanical emergency. Austin tractor. During World War I, the United Kingdom faced a major crisis in agriculture. Farm labor was disappearing, draft animals were becoming scarce, and food production desperately needed to continue. Out of that chaos came the Austin tractor in 1917, built by the Austin Motor Company. And honestly, looking at it today feels like someone grabbed random industrial parts and somehow turned them into a functioning tractor. The machine used a 4-cylinder engine running on gasoline and kerosene, producing around 30 horsepower. The manual transmission was extremely primitive, with short gear ratios focused entirely on brute pulling force. There was no concern for comfort, operator convenience, or smooth operation. Its only purpose was dragging heavy implements through difficult conditions. Visually, the tractor looked completely disproportionate. The gigantic rear steel wheels were fitted with huge metal spikes designed to claw through wet ground, while the front end seemed almost too small for the rest of the machine. Watching an Austin tractor move across a field felt like seeing a giant wartime survival machine trying to escape into agriculture. Operating one required real endurance. The driver sat fully exposed to wind, smoke, mud, heat, and non-stop vibration. On rough terrain, the steel wheels slammed violently against rocks and uneven ground, producing a heavy metallic noise that could be heard from far away. Despite being awkward, uncomfortable, and difficult to control, the Austin tractor helped British farms survive one of the toughest periods in European history. In some rural areas, people actually lined up just to watch one working, because the machine looked too strange and oversized to function properly. Today, the few surviving examples are treated as historical treasures from the early days of British agricultural mechanization. And if this tractor already looked visually absurd, the next machine introduced technology that wouldn't become common until decades later. John Deere Dain all-wheel drive. Long before four-wheel drive became normal in modern tractors, John Deere decided to experiment with a completely radical idea for the early 20th century. In 1918, the Dain all-wheel drive was born, one of the rarest, strangest, and most advanced tractors in American agricultural history. The most shocking part is how modern it looked compared to everything else from its era. The tractor used a massive two-cylinder engine producing around 45 horsepower, extremely impressive numbers for the time. But the real innovation was the four-wheel drive system. While most tractors still struggled for basic traction in muddy conditions, the Dain distributed power to all four wheels at once, dramatically improving grip in difficult terrain. Visually, it looked like an uncontrolled engineering experiment. The tall wheels, elevated chassis, and unusual placement of mechanical components made it appear as if the tractor had been assembled inside a secret testing workshop. When operating over rough terrain, the entire machine moved in a strange way that looked decades ahead of typical farm equipment. In actual field work, the tractor proved incredibly capable of pulling implements through areas where ordinary machines became stuck almost immediately. But all that advanced technology came at a price. The tractor was expensive, difficult to manufacture, and simply too advanced for many farmers to fully trust at the time. Only a handful were ever produced, and for decades the Dain all-wheel drive became almost mythical among collectors and agricultural historians. Today, restored examples displayed at museums and specialty events attract crowds of people trying to understand how a machine this advanced already existed in 1918. What makes the story even more fascinating is that many ideas introduced by the Dain eventually became standard features in modern high-horsepower tractors decades later. These old tractors prove that agriculture has gone through some truly insane phases. Massive machines, loud engines, uncomfortable designs, and equipment that looked strange, even for their own time. But despite their bizarre appearance, these tractors helped transform farming and opened the door for modern agricultural mechanization. Some became legends among farmers. Others almost disappeared completely. And many still impress people today because of their engineering, their appearance, and the completely unconventional solutions they brought to farm work. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these tractors looks the most impossible to believe? Which one would you want to see running in person? And what machine do you think should have been included on this list? If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. That support helps the channel continue bringing videos about vintage tractors, giant combines, and the most unbelievable agricultural machines ever built. See you in the next video.